I'm the voice of Night Industry 2000's microprocessor, KITT for easy reference, KIT if you prefer.
Welcome back. Tom Greene and I continue our talk regarding all his memories on Knight Rider. So fasten your seatbelts for a lot of more great stories from Knight Rider producer and writer Tom Greene. Enjoy.
Happen. Now, we were talking about how we write episodes and we would be in teams. One of the most amazing experiments, and it's interesting, was we did, of course, Goliath, a huge hit.
Yeah.
And of course, as I think I mentioned before, Universal bought the semi. It was very expensive. But the reason they bought it was they were really starting to push up their tour, turning it more into Disneyland, which, 5-10 years later, they put in hundreds of millions, and now it's amazing. And the whole Star Walk, whatever it is, all that was being built where Fuddruckers was, which we discussed.
Yeah.
They also there was such an amazing ratings hit on the original Goliath that they were going to do something else, and we have a thing called, I forget what it is, it's not Speed Week, it's something week. And it's not fun, I just forgot the name of it. But the idea is that you put in, every series puts in their biggest, most important show, either with stunt casting or a 2-hour, or someone's going to die, or something going to be revealed. And its name can't come to me. But anyway, and they had something that they were supposed to do, and I remember they even had they paid, I forgot who it was, another writer, which is the dumbest thing to do, to write a 2-hour special Knight Rider. And they're going to put it in, I keep wanting to say Squeak's Week, but that's not what it's called. And of course, when we all hated the idea, and this was ridiculous. And of course, the script came in, we never saw it, and the network said, we're in trouble. We need something for our big week. And they were going to, this was on they had gotten the script on a Thursday, and they were going to actually prep it quickly and start shooting it the next Monday.
Yeah.
So now we all get a call at like 4 a.m. from Robert Foster, the executive producer, and he said to me, Rob Gilmer, and Janice Hendler, and he says, I want you to get up and like by 6 this morning, meet me at Hamburger Hamlet, which was a kind of a hangout go to, which opened very, very early, or it may have been 24 hours. Of course, based on Hamlet of Shakespeare, it had all that on the inside. But we used to hang out there a lot and have meetings there, because they'd let you sit there for hours, and we talk about scripts and everything. And that's when he informed us that we're going to need to write, and what they all decided to do, Network, is a sequel to Goliath. And here's the thing, we're going to beat it out, and that means it's 8 acts, because it's 4 acts, and it's a 2-hour. We're going to sit here with our bacon and eggs, and we're going to beat out 8 acts, and then we're going to hand 2 acts to each one of you. You go back to your office, and by the end of today, you write those 2 acts, and you have them done. And then tonight, you're going to give them to me, and then he will kind of buff and sand them, and so everything kind of fits. So that night, at like midnight, he could send to the network this big 2-hour, show. And, and that's how Goliath, and it's really remarkable in those days that, when you're writing something, a show you're doing a lot, it kind of starts to write itself after a while. And you just get into, it's like an athlete who can just do, amazing things. And you get into this rhythm. And, I've written for another one of these big things, for when I was doing the $6 Million Man, over a weekend, I wrote a 2-hour called The Bionic Boy, which is, I won't go into the whole story, but, I worked I didn't sleep for like 48 straight hours, and you can do it. And it's a good show, but, and I did that with other shows too, but, and people have said, and I think you even mentioned this, that, written in one day, and the story created over breakfast, And the story has to be kind of complicated. And I believe Anne Turkel, didn't she come back
Yeah, she
for?
did. She did. Yeah, she did.
We loved her, and we know that David was terrified of her, so we said, "Oh, we got to bring her back."
He was.
And,
He was. We need to hear more about that, but that's
oh yeah, I'll tell you in a minute about
yeah.
that. Yeah, but I thought I'd mentioned it before, but uh, people have said they liked it even better than the original Goliath, and because in this one, what we did is instead of plot, we all put in some of our own. We all have little tricks or things we love to write about. One thing I love to do, and it's funny because when they did it, that's where, which I'll mention in a minute here, the story of Devin and almost leaving the show. And we wanted to give him more to do.
Yeah.
So instead of just being in his office saying, the prince wants to have you kidnapped, we actually had him go. And if I'm not mistaken, this is the one where they end up in a jail.
Yeah.
And Devin is with him. And I always loved to come up with, which ended up years later becoming, they call it now MacGyvering something.
Yeah.
And where in this he takes the stays of his shirt collar, and I thought I might mention this already, and the filament from the light and some other things, and because he talks about being in the service in England, and turns it into like plastic explosive, and they get to blow out of the bars and get away, which was really kind of wonderful. So that was my thing, and it was funny because I think it was Ann Daniels again, who head of the studio, when she saw that, and she actually turned to me when they were looking at it, saying, that could be a neat character for a series or whatever, to do this. And I have to say here, and I apologize if I've told this story before, but there's no way that that MacGyver was ripped off for me. It was just, again, like the Midnight Run thing. It was just one of those things. But the only reason I mention it was I was at that time doing Knight Rider and another show. The smart me, or if I was really ambitious and money, I should have went, oh man, that is a magnificent idea. Let's do a lunch. Let's talk about it. Let's make, and then who knows if it would have been as successful as MacGyver, but that was a kind of a funny thing. Yes, I thought I'd mentioned this before. Anne was wonderful because we didn't have this much, and later I'll tell you about the Gina Davis thing, but it was very hard to find very tall actors. And Anne Turkel, of course, is almost as tall as David. Yeah. She has an amazing personality and charisma.
Yeah, she does.
And she's scary.
Yeah.
And David, who hadn't seen tall girls like that, she loved to intimidate him. And and it was very fun to watch. He was very sweet with her and all that, but and there were times when she'd come in and, he would excuse himself and just quietly kind of walk somewhere else. And it was just a delightful thing to see. And again, I thought I'd mention this, but when she first came to do, I think, her first show that she did with him, I don't know if it was, but the first show that when she's introduced, the character, she walked onto the set with like 5 beautiful tall models, like swimsuit, models, Sports Illustrated swimsuit models in these tiny little bikinis.
No wonder you wanted to bring her back.
Yeah. And everyone went at it. Oh, damn it. Because unlike, I did shows like, Magnum, and even working with the guys on Baywatch and different shows they did, and so there's always hot babes all around, and you did. But after doing Knight Rider for a while, Knight Rider unfortunately was not known for having, you'd have interesting babes in distress, but it wasn't a hot babe show.
No.
And so, for the crew especially to see these girls, and the reason this happened, she was going to do, or she just came back, or she was going to do in the back lot a photo shoot for the bikinis. And the wonderful thing that she had, I don't know if she invented it, but it was a fabric that women could wear, and the UV rays of the sun would go through the fabric so that you would get a full body tan.
Oh, yeah.
And so there's always the white breasts and the white pelvic and all that, but this white tushies, But that's why she had. But she did it purposely. That was her entrance. To come in.
Brilliant, brilliant.
You know, and she was, and I don't know if she was going through the divorce, but she was married to Richard Harris, and he was brilliant. One of these iconic guys, like all those great, like um, Richard Burton and Peter O'Toole and all these Oliver Reed, these English hard drinkers, but brilliant guy. And he was one of those guys, but also brilliant. But I don't think living with him was easy. And so he was only Winter Kell could have lasted as long as she did with him. But but she was really great. So that was her show. And I keep having this memory, and I should just go back and look at the show again, that I was also planting other things in there. And as I, for a long story I won't go into, one of the things I've had in my wallet for many, 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 many years as a good luck charm thing is it's like a $5 Bahama dollar bill. And if you look in those, the Bahama bill is one of the most beautiful things you've ever seen. One side is like, the bottom of the sea with coral and all the beautiful coral and the colors and the fish, and the other side are the pink flamingos. And I always had it in there. And I believe, and I could be wrong, that I did something in there where some character was known to keep that in his wallet. And when they check this guy's wallet, or there's something that they know that either was or it wasn't him, but I'll have to check and look at that. Also, you talk about using people that you really, really like. Two things about a show called Good Night's Work.
Yeah.
And one was, I loved either finding people and putting them in, or discovering actors who were really good and then writing parts for them in, subsequent series that I'm doing. There's a guy named Gerald Heiken who was in virtually every series I did. And it was very funny because in Tales of Gold Monkey, he played a pornographer who, sold actual dirty cards, and this is in the 30s, and at one point brings all these whores supposedly from France, but they're not, like Can-Can girls, and Lumiere, his name was. And and Gerald was a very religious guy. And I said, don't worry, in my next series, you'll play a priest. And sure enough, when I did my miniseries, Wildside, he played Father Cruel, actually was his name, who was a priest who was blind. He was a blind priest. But Alexa Hamilton was in Good Night's Work, and I was blown away with her. She played a really evil, character in Tales of the Gold Monkey. And it's not easy to do in television, to do it with such subtlety and nuance, where you really kind of love to hate them, and they're not like over the top,
Yeah.
And so anyway, I wrote and I gave her, and it was just, she was just a joy. And the other thing about that, which I love to talk about, was when you get to hire actors that you're huge fans of. And to me, it's always the character actors, It's not of course, you're not going to get in those days a Robert Redford or whatever. But, it's funny because my favorite movie of all time, I've actually taught classes in it. I think it's the greatest movie ever made, is 2001: A Space Odyssey. Yeah. And in everything I ever write, there's a references to 2001: A Space Odyssey, which will come in a minute, which we'll talk about. But, and as a matter of fact, in Magnum and some others, William Sylvester played Haywood Floyd, and who and why, I'm not even going why. And he was an American actor, and he lived out here. So I used to always use him just so, and he knew it was so funny. And I tried to shut up after a while because he knew a lot of guys like me were hiring him just to have Haywood Floyd, in his office. What was that guy? What was it? Was Stanley Kubrick? But hey, it was a job, so he, all right, I'll tell you, and he was a lovely man, but and the other person who I absolutely loved and cast in that, and he was also another one, was John Vernon.
Yeah.
Who was also in Good Night. And I purposely wanted, because I did this all the time, he was someone who you love to hate, of course, Animal House being one of, but he's done hundreds of things. He's always playing bad guys, and he was just one of these character actors that you just love. Yeah. And we put him in that. Now that episode, for some strange reason, and I don't know why, had a lot of network interference, and especially the scenes that he did, because I'm not mistaken, Goodnight's may be the one where they crash into his penthouse.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and I think it's the one where he knows that Michael Knight is Michael Long.
yeah,
That may be,
yeah, yeah,
and that's, you talk about another stunt that was done on a set. And Jack Gilligan, that remarkable, no CGI. It wasn't like Mission Impossible or Fast and the Furious. And he really did. First, he did an amazing turbo boost, as if he's going up, to it. And again, no CGI for that. And then on the set, on the stage, he crashes through that. But for some reason, I think they wanted to completely change. It kept trying to change John Vernon's attitude, or he's too mean, or he says, or whatever it was. I'm not even sure anymore. Or things he did to, I think Ann Turkel was involved. And the poor guy, and he was in a lot of scenes, but every night we had to rewrite his scenes for the next day. And so for like 5 days in a row, at like 4 or 3 in the morning, he would get a knock on the door with, here's the new side, here's the new scene, here's the new scene. And he was a little pro about it, but Janice and I, we went to lunch, and she was a huge fan. We loved him so much. And I always loved this thing that we did for the next. So after the show was over and you say goodbye, it was good, huh? You did a great job and hope we'll work again, and which we did. I actually hired him again. And he left. The next morning at 4 in the morning, he gets in the door. Here's your changes for tomorrow. It's like, what? We have to reshoot again? And then for the next week, every night, we had someone we would write fake scenes and
deliver them to him in the middle of the night.
It's never going to end, John. It's just going to, and we loved it. And to his credit, he finally, I remember I was in my office, I think with her, and they said, John Vernon's on the phone. And I thought he was going to say, enough. I remember picking up the phone, and as I picked it up, I can hear this. He had a great laugh, this hysterical laughter, and he just thought it was the funniest thing in the world. And he says, you know what I've done? I've taken every one of those friggin' scenes and I've framed them, and they're all in my office now. So that was such a wonderful thing with him. The other thing, David, his other career was singing.
Yeah.
And he had done some singing before that and all that. But I kind of feel in a way like I was it's like, were you in what's that wonderful basement nightclub where the Beatles first played together, I think in Germany, actually. What would have been like to have been there, or of course for me, what would have been like to have been in the audience when Beethoven conducted the Ninth Symphony for the first time. There's famous stories on, but as good as Beethoven in the Ninth Symphony, I was at a point where I believe was where David decided to go ahead and become a singer. I mean, that's like Beethoven. What it was is the episode "Let It Be Me," I think it was called.
Yeah.
To do with a singer, and I'm not mistaken. And one of the things he actually sings in the amphitheater on the stage. Now, because Universal had this amphitheater, and they just spent millions putting finally it was a literal amphitheater, so it had no roof. But then they realized so they put a roof on it and they modernized it, and they're going to get and they did. They got all these big groups, and they still do, rock groups and things. And they really wanted to push it. Universal's new amphitheater. And you always have, there's product placement, which we couldn't do then, but we could do this, so that we had it taking place, and in the dialogue and in shots, I don't remember how many ended up, shown, but it was every second line was in the Universal's amphitheater, And what Universal did to get us to do that is they gave us what you rarely got, which is called extra breakage. And that means that, you have extras, but you don't have like in a movie or A Star Is Born or something where, you literally pay, thousands of people. However, they paid, I believe, for up to, I think, 300 extras to at least fill the orchestra part. Okay. And the rest is art. And if you remember, there's all these people in there, and, to make it look good. And the director came out and he said, okay, when, David sings and all that. And in those days, now you use your iPhone with the light, we used to have lighters.
Yeah.
We would do the whole thing with the light. So, and they said, we want you, he's going to sing and the lighters. And at the end, you have to leap to your feet as if you've just heard Michael Jackson for the first time or whatever was big at the time, Madonna, and they're getting paid and a meal. So, they're actors, they're extras, but they're told to leap to your feet as if you've heard something you never heard before. And so when David went out and they shot this thing, I do remember something else. I could be wrong, but I was kind of impressed that whenever you do songs, it's always pre-recorded and you lip sync.
Yeah.
Well, I think in this was sort of like, America's Got Talent, where the music was pre-recorded, of course, but I think he actually sang, which was,
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
anyway, so he did that, and suddenly at the end of it, they all leap to their feet, and this is the great. And David was kind of shocked and surprised, and he comes off, and I'm there when he goes, wow. I mean, I'm all right, but they really loved me, and then I didn't want to say anything. And then he said something a little later, he goes, I've been thinking, I've been sort of invited, because it was the last show I think we did, one of the last shows that season. And he said, we're going on hiatus. I got invited to go to Germany, and I think he had a song out or something. I don't think he had a whole album. And I wasn't going to do it. I want to be home with my wife, and hang here and all that. I need to rest. And I think I'm going to do it now. I mean, after I saw that,
That's
how the
brilliant.
reaction. Now, the great thing with that, which would be a great story in itself, is usually in a movie, then you go off and you bomb and you're awful because you don't realize that they're extras. Well, he got that same reaction to real people all through Germany. They absolutely adored him,
Yeah.
which is, I think, the second part of hysterically funny and wonderful is that, he did it. And in fact, it turns out that, he really did get that. And that became his, his wonderful second year.
Yeah, he's a huge singer in Germany. Actually, his number one hit, "Looking for Freedom," it was number 5, I think, on the 1989 Eurochart Hot 100 for the whole year of 1989. He made it to number 5. Yeah, I remember listening to the Danish radio, and they hadn't the record. So I was always waiting when they mentioned David Hasselhoff and Looking for Freedom. But they actually they really never played it. It was I think I didn't get it until 1990 or so in Denmark. So yeah, but brilliant.
Yeah, but he went out Japan. He was huge, and other places. And but again, I think I mentioned this once before. I mean, what David has done now it's unfair with a thing with his daughter did and others, but he's so smart because he's doing now what William Shatner did. Was after a while, William Shatner became, except the difference of William Shatner was, to his own admission, and I worked on 3 Star Trek movies, so I knew him quite well. And for a while, William Shatner was an insane egomaniac and full of himself, but he was very smart. So he got older, and then he started wearing the toque and having the girdle and having face stuff. But he began to realize that it's more fun to be self-effacing and, and be able to laugh at yourself, and people will love you for that, and that's why he is still, what is he, 85 now? Or something? And, and for a long time he's done that, and he's done movies where he plays a character who's an egomaniac and so forth. So he changed. David was never an egomaniac or any of that, but when he had a couple of things and people were saying things about him and he's a washout and they only like him in German, he then turned it around and he had fun with it. Yeah. And he did all kinds of things to, be self-effacing about himself and make jokes about himself. And he's been brilliant that way because people love him now because he's able to say, no, I'm not Daniel Day-Lewis. I'm not Laurence Olivier from the days. I'm not going to be doing Shakespeare. I love what I do. And he does. He loves his life and everything. But that was and it was so good for him. And now, as you know, there was a bit of a dry spot between, as I've mentioned before. After Knight Rider, everyone was saying, "It's over. That's all he's going to do." And I kept telling. And remember, I think I mentioned this before. I actually said to him, at the Palms. I think that was the restaurant. I couldn't think the name of it. In Beverly Hills, he used to like to go there. And I said, David, you could stand by yourself at a volleyball court on the beach and people would watch you.
Yeah.
I had nothing to do with Baywatch, but isn't that ironic?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so he's done really well.
And
The other going forward about other people that you write to, you like, there was an episode, I think it's called Big Iron.
yeah.
And this is kind of funny. She's still around fat, and I think you met her, Patch McKenzie. I think, didn't you say you've met her?
No, no, I don't think so. Pat
Is it
McKenzie.
Patch McKenzie? Was it? Was
Yeah.
the one you met?
No, 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 I don't think I haven't met her.
Oh, I'm sorry, but she's in Big Iron.
Yeah,
And
I think we talked about Tony Hudson.
oh, is that it? Yeah.
Yeah.
But the patch was, and my whole point was, I never cast her anything. I said, oh, but I kept running into her on the sets of other shows. She didn't know me, but she just kind of ran, oh, hi. And it was the funniest thing. It was Beretta and Kojak, Emergency, and so forth. And when I was doing Magnum PI, I created a character named Lieutenant Poole, which is this really ballsy woman who she ended up becoming a commander, actually. And it was funny. And actually, by the way, remember I say I use names or situations of 2001, everything I wrote. Well, Frank Poole is one of the two
Poole.
main astronauts,
Yeah.
the one who gets killed. And that's where Poole comes from. And she ended up doing 10 episodes of that. And I cast her in that. I finally said, we keep running into each other. I wrote this part for you. And she was also in something. For Universal was doing a lot of movie history things. The one called Gable and Lombard, another one called W.C. Fields and Me, and they're doing those. And one other thing is I am an actual historian about Hollywood. I can bore you in trivia about old Hollywood forever. And I was hired on those shows to be the consultant. As a matter of fact, very quick, Morgan Brittany, I always love when things come back together. Morgan Brittany, in a scene in Gable and Lombard, played Vivian Lee in a scene of course, Gone with the Wind with Clark Gable, played by James Brolin. And I was called in when they did that with what I knew, it's the famous bridge scene. To make sure it was accurate and the clothes and what they say and that's the first time I ever met Morgan, which was funny. But it's a wonderful thing when you can in our business when you can help people and make you feel like you maybe had something to do with the spark, which we'll talk a little bit about in Gina Davis on that.
Let's just continue. I have a question.
Yes.
Regarding the shooting schedule and the air date of the episodes, because the episodes did not necessarily air on the network in the same way that they were shot. Can you tell us a bit about?
Absolutely.
What is behind the decision of when to air an episode and why is this happening?
Well, it's very, very specific. And I've come up with that name that it's called Sweeps Week. When you're trying to do shows, they're going to sweep the ratings. They call it Sweeps Week. And that answers your question for this. It's not just Sweeps Week, they don't do anymore, where literally that 1 week of ratings for all the series of all the different networks would give you a balance or a foundation for how much you're going to charge per minute to the sponsors. So you better have something good. Now, your ratings each week are also important. And they look at these vitally important, not only, got more sophisticated now, it's insanely sophisticated, more even with streaming like Netflix and so forth, because they can, I think, go in and not only they can look at your TV and see what you're wearing, what you're eating, if you watch it, something between your teeth. But what they would do is if a show like Knight Rider was always a big hit, way up there. But sometimes not all your shows were great, and the people watching it's interesting. You always say, what is your favorite? What is the worst? I remember, for example, as much as I love knight in shining armor. And it was all about love and all that. I saw somewhere, maybe it was Internet Movie Database, some people were like it, but they actually had some reviews. Someone said, the most boring Knight Rider ever done. All you had to do with beauty and love. And they're right. I mean, for a lot of especially kids, that is boring, and he's absolutely right. So I'm saying you never know. The reason I mention that is that you may have some shows that are a little down, and before they even air, if they're getting nervous, and I did a lot of big shows. In fact, when I was doing Magnum PI, and I'm not taking credit for this, but it was the #1 show in the country. And all that means is the network makes your life even more miserable. But if you're this high up and you just start dropping a little bit, or they're getting nervous about your demographics. Do you know what the demographics are? That's very important for sponsors. What age groups?
Yeah, exactly.
9 to 11 boys, 5 to 7 girls, are watching, and then they can use that to sell certain sponsors.
Yeah, you don't want commercials for diapers when it's a teenage audience.
Exactly, and so, but Knight Rider tended to change on the shows, whether they were more feminine or more masculine. I give Janice Henler a lot of credit for some of the shows she wrote on her own, like Hit the Cat, which we'll talk about in a minute, which is a very strong female character. But the network started getting nervous because they would look and they'll say, "Oh, wait a minute. You've just finished, you got a show that you're going to do, or it's in production, it's another very female strong show." Nah. So if they have a couple that are on, they haven't aired yet, they will constantly switch.
Yeah, okay. So to get a better blend, you could say.
Well, to keep different people watching the show, and it doesn't become now. The truth is, and we'll talk about again Edward Mulhare and a show where we almost didn't make the deadline. Many times you don't have that luxury, because basically in most television, the show that's in production, when it goes into post-production, within a week or less, it's airing. So, it's that show. But what they will do is they'll go back. You will have, in many cases, all 23 shows on. You have a big board, and what the show is, where it is it in story, is it treatment, first, second draft, is it in pre-production, post-production, where it is. And we all have this, and you get it. And so sometimes, though, the network has okayed all these shows. Yeah. And we call them log lines. That's, what the show is about. And so they'll somebody say, "Can you move up this show?" Or "Can you do let's get this one up now here, finish, because this one has more action, or this one has sex, or this has, So that's why it keeps changing.
Were there ever problems getting a show finished? So that you would say, "Okay, actually, we hope that we could air it on this date, but we have to push it further forward in time."
Well, that's my
finish.
Well, that's the biggest night. It's funny. People have different nightmares. Of like here in America, one of them is, you're walking through your high school and you're naked, which is, or more to the point, which we all get, and everyone has it, is you're back in high school and you're taking your final exam that you didn't know you had, and you haven't studied for it. When am I going to do it? Or the one I always have is you're going to a class and you realize, I haven't been in this class all semester, Oh my God, I'm going to fail. The reason I mention all that is that as a producer, you wake up, your biggest fear is missing a deadline. Now, if you do that, the studio has to pay huge fines, and they have to put in a rerun, and it's a horrible. Now, Glenn Larson, I think, is the only one I know on some of his shows. He had a whole bunch of shows that he got. One was called Manimal. Was that Auto Man, which I think was Tron ripoff, and he had two other. I think he had 4 shows that he sold in one season. The only one to ever do it. And he was pretty well involved in those shows too. And it got to be so much and overwhelming, he actually missed some dates. Okay. And when that was almost like saying, "Did you hear about Glenn Larson? He went into the commissary and shot up 15 people." What? Seriously, to miss the deadline. And so and we were close to that. And it's a wonderful story and I don't remember which episode it was, But in one of my earlier podcast things here, I'm sure I told you about the ADR and the fact that we had to utilize the older equipment to record outside. And Universal, they would make money, as you know, on everything, because if you use their cameras, you use their sets, you're using their ADR, using it, and they charge, that's in the budget. So they get that money paid back to them. And they always talk about the fact that they deficit finance shows because at the end, then they get money in syndication. One thing you should know, there is no series, or at least it used to be this way, and it's pretty well now, where the studio hasn't figured out the pattern budget that even if a show goes like 6-10 episodes, they've already made a fortune on all the stuff they've pulled back. And so ADR is they could get a lot of money, and that's the automatic dialogue replacement. You've seen that.
Yeah.
And you have to go back, as I've mentioned before, and you have a scene and they're outside and Michael says, "Kit, I need you." But the way it's in the what we call the O track, which is the original track when Oshada was, so you have to go back and do that. And I think I also explained real quickly about Peter Falk and Columbo.
Yeah.
And he said, "I'm not going to any ADR. You've got enough equipment, you do that." So if you watch old Columbo's, as I said, everyone else outside is talking like this. And then he goes, "No one, you have one more question." Anyway, which I've already mentioned. So we had a show, and there were other problems on the show, including, by the way, if I remember, there was some problems with Kit itself. That there was a problem with the actual car, and it was what we call the hero car. It's the car that actually goes around, and there were delays. I think this was also the episode where the night before it was in kind of a bad area, and someone broke into one of the trucks and stole some equipment.
Yeah.
So, it was kind of a gang area. And so we were kind of on the cusp. The other problem is we had a fabulous associate producer. And I'm embarrassed because I want to say Bernadette, but I don't think that was her name. But she was brilliant. And an associate producer is very much involved in post-production, in the editing, in the mix. Yeah. You do a dub in the mix and the ADR and the inserts and all these others. It's a and a good associate producer is worth their weight in gold. To make things worse on this is she was on maternity leave, having a baby.
Of course.
So they brought in another person who really wasn't experienced in the ADR. Now we had to have, what had happened was there was an actress who actually had done quite a bit of stuff, but I think she was going through a divorce or something. She was going through a really hard time. And they had to do a lot of dialogue with her in this one night. And if they didn't get it done that night, we would miss the deadline. So it's bum, bum, bum. And Edward Mulhare also, he only had like 3 lines that he had to do that night. But when he came in, they were doing her, some of her lines, and she was screwing it up. And it was exactly like, I don't know if you have that here, but here we have this nightmare at a supermarket where you have like, an apple or a can of Coke that you want to buy, and the person in front of you has a cart filled with enough to feed an entire soccer team. Yeah. And it's like you want to say, "Could I get in front of you?" And mostly they'll say yes, but you get some a-hole who will say, "No, I'm here." Yeah. Well, that was it. Edward Mulhare looks down and sees how much work she has. She's like 3 hours of work, and he wants to go home. But they're set up for her, and they have what it is, they have these film clips, and you probably see this in movies, and it'll go boop, 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 and then boom, then you have to say the line. Yeah. And so that was all set up, and so Edward had to wait and wait, and he was getting more and more angry, and she kept blowing it, and it was an emotional time for her. She was a professional, and the more she blew it, also the more upset she got, because being a professional, she was embarrassed. That she was screwing it up, and it's like a soccer person who lets the goalie, the ball go through or something. Yeah. I shouldn't be doing this, and everyone kept saying to her, it's okay. But he was getting more angry, and so at one point, what he did is there was a line before that in the boop, boop, boop you hear, and then she had to react to the line. So Edward got up and goes, "For God's sake, this is crazy." And he gets up and he said, the line was something like, "This do you have it or not? And then she's supposed to say, no, I don't. So he got up, and so when he goes, do you have it or not? And she went, no, I don't, and did it beautifully. And they said, great, okay, we can move on. So they did the next one, and he looks down at the thing, and it's whatever it is. And so she says, and he reads the line. He says, are you coming with us? And no, I don't know, whatever. But he does it in his way. So they said to him, they said, listen, that one we got in one take. I said, this is fantastic, Oh, and he also he did something the first time she did it. He goes, no, you're not here. You're not in the goddamn opera, young lady. This is not Wagner. You speak like a human being. And I'll bet you never in your life you ever talked to anyone like that. So, and she went, oh, and then she did it well. So the guy was up in the ADR said, listen, Edward, do you mind? You're too terrific. Could you just feed her the lines for the rest of this? And then she's looking at all this. And he says, are you out of your mind? Yeah, you're going to pay me a absolute fortune to be here. I'm not, because you don't get paid. That's part of your cast thing. When you do ADR, it's part of the money you got for for acting in it. So you don't get paid anymore for it. He said, you're going to pay me on this? Absolutely, but it's absolutely ridiculous. I have papers to go, people to see. I have a life of my own. I'm not going to sit here because someone can't do that. I've had it. And, I'm looking, if you want my eyes, you can come. And he leaves. And they're like, they don't know what to do. And she gets very upset. And so what they always do, let's take a break.
Yeah.
And so they took a break, for like a half hour or something. And they come back, and she's in there, and everyone is saying, we're not going to make, they're calling. In fact, I was still at the studio. It was like, they even called me, we're not going to make the deadline, and, confidentially, she's just not going to get it. We're not going to have it. We have to have these lines, just be prepared, be aware, we're all getting upset. And a half an hour goes by, she comes back, and let's keep trying, because they have to shut down. They can't go all night. No. They're budget wise at like 10 or something. They started late, but they have a certain amount of hours, and then if they're going into meal penalty and overtime, they just budget wise, can't do. And I think there's something in the union that they had already done an overtime. They can't do 2. You can't have them going all night. In other words, so through their union, they would have to leave. And the projectionist is there. They would have to leave. There's all these different unions. But she comes in, and they sort of start, and the door opens, and Edward walks in. And they look over, and he says, yeah, now you really want to be angry. And he had this fabulous, I think it was an MG. He had a little sports car, which was his absolute pride and joy. And I think he actually had it shipped over from England. I could be wrong, but he loved it, and he always drew. And it was in a convertible, and he put on a whatever it is you put on with it, and his, and he even had sometimes he even wore a scarf, had a scarf, and he, for fun. I mean, he wasn't great. It was to dress up, and he came in. He said, "Oh damn, can't believe it, my sports car." He says, "Some horrible monster, great man in his truck into it. It's ruined, and I have to now wait to get a flatbed tow truck to come in and take it. And I don't believe it's gone. It's gone. And if I can make the city and all that," and he sits down, now I have to wait for the tow truck. I told him to come meet me here. And everyone's like, and this is not helping her, right? So she starts up again. He goes, "Oh, damn it." He says, "I have nothing else to do. All right. I'll feature the effing lines. Come on. And he went and he fed her the lines, and she just zoomed through it with his help. And they got it done, which was going to be 3 hours. They got it done like in 40 minutes or something, more than enough time. Everything was incredible. And then he left. And the beauty of this story is I'm hearing all this, and I heard about him, and I'm thinking, okay, and I'm even thinking, okay, well, how can we fix on our budget to buy him a new sports car, and and whatever, and you're trying all the, and then says, "Oh, he has insurance. I'm sure he did." And so I'm in my office, and you look out from where my office was, there out the window. There's a parking lot but it's the VIP parking lot, And I look, and suddenly I see these headlights moving this way, and then it's going to turn onto the road from the parking lot. And I look, and it's Edward
Okay.
in his sports car, which was completely untouched. And you realize that what this guy did, he came back, he felt bad, he came back, made up the story about the sports car because he couldn't possibly say, "Oh, I'll help," after what he went through. I won't do it. So he came up with this idea of the sports car in order to help her and to do that. I mean, that is such a,
That's awesome.
you talk about this awesome, Edward. And I, of course, have another story, which I think I'll end with the motorcycle
Yeah.
story, which
Yeah.
is my favorite of all time. One of the last ones, I guess, that I had a credit on, but I produced a lot more, was, which is interesting, where do you get your ideas or something? And sometimes we just steal from great, we do show, like, and not a steal, but Janice Hendler and Kat, she loved Cary Grant. Well, God, what is it? Cary Grant and Grace Kelly, Catch a Thief,
Yeah.
the Hitchcock film. And so it was basically kind of where a woman plays the Cary Grant character as the burglar.
Yeah.
Anyway, one other episode called Dead of Night. And where that came from is there was an obscure film noir movie called DOA, which means Dead on Arrival, DOA.
Yeah.
And it had one of them, and I loved it as a kid. I saw it just once, and in those days, you couldn't go out and get it on Netflix or Blockbuster, which is no longer around. But in the days when those Blockbusters, and it was what we call film noir. It was one of these very low budget films, usually shot in downtown LA, black and white, and it usually had to do with gangsters, and there would be a chase and all that. But they're wonderful, and it became a very big thing, film noir movies. And this was one of them for an independent. Edward O'Brien, wonderful actor, played this part. And what happens in very quickly, and it's one of the greatest openings, is over the credits, and it's always a jazzy sax credit of music they use. You see him walking through downtown LA and sort of in the more industrial areas, not the pretty areas. And he's walking, and he gets to a police station, an old broken down police station. And he goes inside, and when the credits are done, the dialogue starts. And he goes, "Yeah, the guy at the desk, yeah, I'm going to help you." He says, "I need to speak to a detective." All right. I say, "Hey, Joy, someone wants to talk to you. Do you get it?" And the guy's in there. I'm just finishing my sandwich. Puts a sandwich down in his car. "All right, what do you want?" He says, "I need to report something to you." "Okay." You always see, he takes out the paper, the report thing, puts it in the typewriter, and says, "Okay, what's your name?" Hallis Ewan, whatever he gives him his name. "Yeah." "And where do you live?" And he gives me the address. "Yeah." "What do you want to report?" "A murder." "A murder?" "Yes." "Whose?" And he says, "Mine." And that's the opening of this brilliant thing.
Can I help you? I'd like to see the man in charge. He's in here. I want to report a murder. Sit down. Where was this murder committed? San Francisco, last night. Who was murdered? I was.
Which, of course, if Dead of Night, as you know, has somewhat based on that. And in that, it's really crazy. It was that he's been poisoned. He doesn't know who poisoned him, and he only has 24 hours to live. And he's going to, he says, I need to report it to the police so you know what's going on, but I am going to find out who killed me before I die, and I'm going to kill him, Yeah. But so I'm letting you know, but he's murdered me. And if I don't get to kill him, you have to find. So that's how Dead of Night came. By the way, one thing that I have to tell you, which is very funny because it just come out, the poison that they use in it was fluorescence, like fluorescent paint. in the DOA, and there's actually a scene where he goes to the doctor. There's a flashback, and he's saying, "Doctor, I'm feeling bad." And the doctor says, "Well, you have to look at this." He had taken a vial of his blood, and he holds up the blood and turns the light off, and the blood is glowing. He says, "You've been poisoned by fluorescent."
Yeah.
So anyway,
And that is all we have time for today. But Tom Greene and I will continue our conversation regarding his memories on Knight Rider in a 5th installment of this interview. So take care, and hope you'll be back for the next part of this interview, the last part.